Hello everybody, it's Foxy speaking, and welcome to another episode of Foxy's Fun Inspirational Chats. And today I will be my host. Wow! Oh my goodness. It has certainly been a very, very long time since I last did an Inspirational Chats episode. But fortunately lost, because last time I did one was in May of 2024, and it's June of 2024, and it's really, wow, gosh, it's been over a month since the last episode. But I fortunately, but as I generally do with the case with the Inspirational Chats episode, I try and upload definitely no less than 2 or 3 episodes a month. But I'm trying to remember, I think I uploaded about 4, maybe, something like that. I will need to check how many Inspirational Chats episodes I did. But even though there have been the Inspirational live stream series happening, it is no way going to be a replacement for the Inspirational Chat series whatsoever. No. The Inspirational live stream is just messing around, it's just horsing around. It's simply, specifically about horsing around, messing around and having fun on the Inspirational live stream, and then inviting guests about an hour or so into the live stream, effectively being about 2 hours of messing around, having fun. Just to say. So... oh, sorry, something got a bit stuck in my teeth, but it's rectified now. But I thought I'd like to do a story, that could help people, who may be emotionally struggling with some things in their life, This is the story about a young boy in his secondary school whose class was going to play rugby. They were going to be playing with some of the older year groups. The boy was a 12-year-old boy. The boy's name was Neil. And Neil, who was in a class of about 15 children, was playing, which was the second year of secondary school, and not the first year of secondary school. His class were going to be playing rugby against a few of the third secondary school year children, being that of 13 to 14-year-olds playing rugby. Some of the teenagers were big boys, much bigger than he was. He was little. He was a little thing, not quite a little thing for his age. He was about average height for a 12-year-old boy, but didn't come from a typically tall family. And not only was he was he fairly little, but just over 5 feet of height. He was also quite skinny, with small bodily proportions, and sometimes that could be a problem. Here's the reason why. Neil got into position. He had his rugby kit, his shorts, and his gum shield, and helmet on and everything, as did all of his classmates. And then they got ready to play rugby. They were going to do a scrum first. He wanted to avoid the scrum because he knew he was going to get hurt. So that he couldn't be seen, he just tried to get in an easy spot so that it looked as though he was participating in the scrum, but he wasn't really participating in it, because he didn't want to get hurt too much, most understandably. The sports teacher, his physical education sports teacher got ready, got his whistle in his mouth, but before he took the whistle out of his mouth and said, "Ready, get set, scrum!" The whistle blew, and the scrum of rugby began. The scrum began, As the scrum intensified, the rugby ball inadvertently slipped out of the hands of one of the third secondary school year students' hands participating in the rugby sports game. Little Neil picked up the ball and immediately began running. He ran around the pitch as fast as he could, but there were some much bigger boys. There was a roughly 6 foot 14-year-old, about a foot or either nearly or just over a foot taller than he was, and several stones larger and significantly wider, was running almost like Roadrunner, the cartoon Roadrunner. Little Neil tried to run as fast as he could, but the big, very, very big, tall teenager was too fast for him and bested him easily. So, as quick as a wink, the big, tall teenager grabbed Neil by under the legs to try and rugby tackle him, but he was too late to quickly rugby tackle Neil, which unfortunately sent Neil tumbling, falling over. He hit his head on the rugby ball, bounced and began to fly, but then there was trouble. As he flew into the air and eventually landed back down, but because he was small, he was aerodynamic. He was flying, shot up in the air. He went flying and flying and flying. "Oh no, what have I done?" said the very tall, huge teenager. He didn't mean to hurt Neil. He was just trying to play the rugby game. Fortunately, the sports teacher and the coach had stopped the game because of what happened to Neil. Because he'd gone flying. Because of his small size and his physical bodily proportions, this made him easily a target for being aerodynamic. So he was shot up in the air, but the teenager, quick as a wink, just began running as fast as he could and ran underneath the goalpost. He was flying and began to just tilt downwards forward until then there was trouble. Neil's kneecap hit the pole. Ow! Neil shrieked in pain as his kneecap hit the pole off the post and began flying down. The teenager, fortunately, who was running, got to the post just in time as Neil was falling down and the gravity made him fall, got his hands out, and Neil fell into the hands of his rugby opponent. And as Neil fell into the hands and arms of his rugby opponent, it sent both of them tumbling and falling onto the pitch. Both were injured. The sports teacher and the coach rushed over to little Neil and the big tall teenager to examine the damage and the accident. As all the other classmates and rugby opponents examined what had happened, they thought Neil and the teenager had fainted in pain because of what happened. But little did they know, they were not fainting, they were just injured. So Neil got back. A head began to tilt and move, and a huge body began to move and tilt. As the head moved up, looking towards all of his worried classmates and opponents, and as the opponent began to tilt and roll over and look towards all the worried opponents and his classmates and the sports coach and PE teacher, they just looked and stared at them for about 30 seconds before eventually sticking a thumbs up to them both. Everybody was relieved they had not fainted in pain. But then the coach walked over to little Neil and the teenager and examined them both, only to find a shock. The shock he found was Neil's kneecap was bruised. There was blood dripping all over it. "Gotta take little Neil to first aid," said the coach. The PE teacher agreed. And so the coach directed little Neil, who tried to walk over but it hurt, but luckily gave him some aided support to take him over to the medic. To take him over to the first aid section. In the first aid section, Neil had to miss out on the rest of the game whilst all his classmates and opponents could play the rugby game. He and his opponent sat next to each other as they were being treated, as the coach was wiping and cleaning off the wounds of where they had the injuries or where they had bruised their body parts. Neil sighed sadly and just stared sadly to the ground. His opponent looked towards the sad little boy. "What's the matter?" asked the teenager. "I wish I could be good at the rugby game," Neil moaned. "I mean, I get rugby tackled too easily by big teenagers. It's like it's a dangerous game, rugby. Why do people even aspire to play it? The teenager looked and smiled to him. "Do be assured, youngster, I'm not a bad guy. This is what rugby's all about. You've got to run as fast as you can with the ball, and if you're about to be rugby tackled, you have to chuck it you have to pass the ball to your teammates. But you cannot pass the rugby ball to your teammates in the process of being rugby tackled. But I'm sorry if I may have taken it a touch too far. I was just trying to follow the game, the instructions of the game." Neil looked up to the teenager, looking that he was not a bad guy, but they were just opponents playing a rugby game. He began to smile a little bit, but his smile wasn't enough to make his opponent smile. "I'll tell you something, youngster," the teenager said. "You're perfect just how you are. Some people are built for playing rugby, some people are not built for playing rugby. Different people are good at different things. You are good. You are fine and perfect just how you are." Little Neil wasn't so sure, but he looked down on the grass for about 5 seconds. Then he looked towards his opponent with a rather confused look on his face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked in confusion to his opponent. His opponent smiled and said, "Oh, of course. As my mum would say, do not exceed your limits. Only do what you can, and if you can't do something, don't worry about it. Because if you can't do something and you just try and force yourself into doing something, all you're going to do is create burdensome stress and worry." Neil knew that his opponent was right. He knew that in the future, rugby may not be the right contact sport for him. "I tell you what you'd be very good at, youngster," the teenager said, smiling towards him as they continued to bond in conversation. You make a brilliant rounders player. You do really good playing rounders. I mean, I've never seen you play rounders, but I have a group of friends who play rounders. We do it after school once a week, and if you ever want to join us, well, you give me your parents' phone numbers, and I'll give you my parents' phone numbers, and we can arrange to have you as part of our team," the teenager said. Neil smiled. He liked this very, very much. "Do you really mean it? I could play rugby with you?" "Yes, of course, youngster," the teenager said. "I mean, I know I didn't mean to seem so mean, but I'd never mean to hurt anyone. Yes, I am a big tall man, teenager for my age, as I'm not even 14, I'm barely 14 yet, well, I'm 14 soon, but where I come from, I come from a big tall family. I have tall parents, but I don't know if you have tall parents, do you, or big people in your family?" Well, no, Neil said to the teenager. We're all not all that tall, and to be honest with you, we're rather small. We're big and wide, said the teenager, but it's okay. We're all different. We come in varied different shapes and sizes, the teenager said. Neil began to smile and chuckle. He was happy with the new friend he was bonding with. His friend may have seemed like a fiercely scary rugby-playing opponent, but he knew that he was not a fierce, scary person in real life. He could see he was a genuinely good person. A certain set of realization began to hit Neil's head. He didn't say anything, but he realized his new friend was right. He knew that everybody is different, no matter where they come from or no matter who they are. But he only wished he'd learnt this early enough in life. But he was happy to have a new friend. What's your name, by the way, opponent? Neil said. Me? I'm Thompson, said the teenager. And what's your name, youngster? Neil, Neil said. It's a pleasure to meet you, Thompson, Neil said as he extended his right hand, and Thompson extended his huge hand towards Neil's little hand, and they began to handshake. Oh, Neil said. Your hand is strong. I thought you were going to break my hand off because you've got a strong handshake. Sorry, Neil, Thompson said, chuckling. Sometimes I forget how strong I am. Sometimes even my family forgets how strong I am whenever we're greeting out shorter friends. The two youngsters continued to bond until, well, your wounds are cleaned up and you're plastered up, said the coach in the first aid section. But it's advisable you two don't play rugby for the It's advisable you two sit out for the rest of the game. We just don't want you two getting hurt any further, the first aid coach said. Disappointed, Neil and Thompson agreed to the first aid coach's advice. But Thompson very kindly wrote his parents' phone numbers down, and then handed the piece of paper towards Neil. Neil was to give it to his parents after he came back home from school. The rugby game was over, and despite Thompson and Neil's injuries from the rugby game, the injuries Thompson sustained for rescuing Neil and saving him from a potentially serious life-threatening injury, and from Neil sustaining an injury from a rugby tackle which led to him shooting up into the air after bouncing off of a rugby ball and hitting a post with his kneecap, and then falling, which could have been not only life-threatening but almost a potentially fatal moment for him. They were about to find out which class won the rugby game. As it turned out, despite the two of them having to be pulled out of the game because of their minor injuries, Neil's classroom won the game. Better luck next time, Thompson, Neil said as he tapped Thompson's great big huge wide shoulder. Well done, Neil. Well done to your class, Thompson said as he gave him a pat on the shoulder. The pat on the shoulder felt like a smack given because of Thompson's huge hands. But Neil knew that Thompson didn't smack him because Thompson was a hell of a lot bigger than he was, not to mention a bit older as well. It was time to go back to class for final lessons. Once the lessons were over, it was time to go home, and Neil, just as he was about to leave school, Thompson called his name. He rushed over to the little young boy and said, "See you tomorrow, Neil, okay? Of course, Thompson, you're a good friend. You take care, mate, won't you?" Thompson said, and Thompson extended his big right hand out to Neil, and then Neil extended his little hand out as gently as he could to try not to hurt Neil. Thompson shook Neil's hand. It was a hard handshake, but luckily it wasn't a squeezed handshake to the point where he could have accidentally broken Neil's hand off. And before long, both went back home. And obviously they were going to see each other again the next morning for the next school day. The end. Well, thank you all for taking the time and listening to this very story, everybody, but, well, you know, I think stories like these, I do wish more of those stories were represented more often, in my opinion, that is, you know, stories where one should feel encouraged to embrace their physical either their physical or mental differences, their physical or intellectually possessed differences, because sometimes I don't think there's enough encouragement towards that in the showcasing grip of it all. But I mean, I could be wrong, but I was just representing my opinion on it. But I would just like to see, hopefully in the future, should it happen, more people being encouraged to embrace their differences and uniqueness, what have you. I personally believe it's the best way forward in life, And what motivated me most to create and tell this story was because of a moving encountering I experienced myself firsthand at Lewes railway station when I changed trains to head back home after I was heading back home from a little day out in Balcombe of West Sussex I had earlier this year. I was at Lewes railway station to change trains because I got the Lewes train from Balcombe, but the Lewes train continued en route to Eastbourne. I got off at the platform and crossed over the railway bridge. And then I went onto the platform. The benches were taken, but in the distance there was another bench with some spare room, but somebody was sitting on it. I couldn't see who it was properly, I just thought it was a little person. And I walked over, but I was a little worried that I would have came at a bad moment, so I stood about a metre away from the person who was, who was this, oh bless her, this what I thought, this little young lady, this little young lady, which I was stood about a metre away from her, and I said, "Oh, excuse me, I hate to be a bother, but could I please take a seat on the bench?" And she looked towards me and said, "Oh, yeah, of course." This little young lady, this little young lady who could hardly have been much more than, 9 stone or 126 pounds of weight, maybe about a pound or two over that, something like that, but quite petite bodily proportions, all that, and with she was a beauty. Don't know about, maybe not as far as a beauty, but she was a nice looking little young lady. Well, I thought she was a little young lady because I'd never seen her stood up before until when our train came. That was the only moment I saw her stood up, fairly close up, that was. And obviously I don't know the little young lady, and I don't know how old she is. I don't know how old she's probably got to be about 17, 18, I guess. I never asked. I mean, she could very possibly be older than me, or possibly my age, but just has a very young look. I mean, she looked very young. I mean, she only looked about 16, 17, something like that. I mean, she could have been old. It's very possible she could have been older than that. Well, I would assume she's older than that because she'd obviously stopped growing and everything, you know. Well, I would have at least thought so, but because some girls stop growing at an earlier age than when boys stop growing, to share a point. But she said it was okay for me to sit down on the bench, and so I sat down on the bench. But I didn't sit next to her because, you know, I just didn't want to seem like an intrusion and seem like an intrusive obstruction towards her. And I really didn't. I just wanted to respect her privacy more than anything. I would want to respect sitting on a bench or sharing a bench with anyone. All I'd really want to do is respect one's privacy more than anything, you know. And I was like, and then I just had to let it out, and I said, I'm so sorry if this was intrusive to your privacy and all that, but the young lady looked and smiled towards me. Such a lovely looking young lady. I mean, well, I don't think I have a crush. Maybe a slight touch of a little crush because I thought she was particularly nice looking. But I didn't fancy her or anything. But I think we could have had friendship potential had we had more time to have a conversant chat together, because we eventually, although I apologise, we just inadvertently boom, had a conversant conversation together. But it only lasted for about 5-6 minutes because we only had about 5-6 minutes before our train was to arrive. And as I was talking to her, some things got quite moving when we were talking, because I was talking to her about a few interesting things, and I mentioned a make of classic car. It was the Chevy and the Dodge I mentioned to her, and much to my surprise, she was completely familiar of it, which astonished me because of looking at how young she looked. I was astonished she'd even be just a little bit, if not fairly remotely familiar of the classic Chevy or Dodge cars. You know, the American Chevy or Dodge classic cars and all that. And I was like, you do have some I have to say, I wasn't expecting you to have some knowledge on the classic Chevy or Dodge cars. And then comes the surprising leaked reveal from her. And the leaked reveal was, she said, I'm half American, you see. I was like, oh, how interesting. I was like, now this explains why you're so familiar of them. And then I spoke about a few other things, etc., and then I mentioned the small classic cars to her, which she seemed quite interested because of her familiarity with the classic Chevy and the Dodge. Obviously, the subject interested her. And then I mentioned the advantages and disadvantages of the classic cars to get inside and out, the small ones that is, not the medium and the big ones. Which she concurrently agreed with me, because she was like, people were shorter back then, and I'm quite tall, and she said, and I'm quite tall, as I'm only 5'9" of height. And I looked at her, I was like, I never could have came under the impression you were tall. Well, because at that point I'd never seen her stood up. And she said, I am. He said, I am, but here comes the moving part. He said, I am tall, but I'm not as tall as my mum. I was like, oh, really? Oh. I was like, really? Oh, wow. And she said, and then she said, and then she just looked at me and pulled a rather, a frown a cross between a frown and a smile, and she was like, just gently nodded, and she said, "Oh, but I wanted to be 6 foot." That was what she said to me, and I was like, well, after she said, "I wanted to be 6 foot, but my mum's like 5'10", something like that. And my dad's probably like 6 foot or 6'1", something like that, but I wanted to be 6 foot. And I looked towards the young lady. It was about 3 minutes before our train arrived, because we were quite a few minutes deep into a conversant chat together. And I just looked at her and I was like, "Oh, bless." And I was like, so that means you're still your mum and dad's little girl. I mean, well, she is, technically, because she undershot her parents' heights. And especially because she never reached her mother or her father's heights, she could still pass for being their little girl. I mean, I would certainly say that, for sure. But, sorry about that. But I wanted to, but there wasn't enough time by this point, but I wanted to empathise with her as much as I could after saying, you could still be their little girl. Only meant it in the nicest way possible. She didn't seem she wasn't offended or anything when I said that. But I wanted to go further and, at least have some empathy towards her, because she clearly, obviously she was, well, I mean, I could be wrong, it's only my opinion, she hadn't embraced who she is. I wanted to say, I was like, after I said, you could still be your mum and dad's little girl, or your parents' little girl, something like that. I think I said that. And I was like, I wanted to say, but there wasn't enough time, I wanted to say, you're perfect just how you are. And after, but I never said that, and what I wanted to say after that, I wanted to say, all the good advantages, the great advantages in her and all that, and why she should embrace being who she is, and try to encourage her that she's perfect and fine just how she is. I'm sure her parents would think the same thing, I would assume so, but I'd never met her parents, so I wouldn't know. But there wasn't enough time to do it, I'm afraid. But I wouldn't have thought she was the height she was. I mean, because we had stood up, close up together, but it only lasted like 30-odd seconds because our train had arrived, and then the moment we stood up together, we just proceeded to boarding the train, and that was the last we saw of each other. But seeing us stood up, I mean, she could have she couldn't have been, much more than, she couldn't have been much more than my height, maybe 5'8.5", something like that. I mean, she couldn't have been 5'9", I wouldn't have thought so. No, I really wouldn't have. So, but never mind. But she was a lovely young thing, she really was. But was obviously, though she was very friendly and lovely, but was really clearly undergoing a lot of disappointment because she wasn't as tall as the height she wanted to be, because she wanted to be taller than her current height she peaked at. But I mean, I really wanted to at least try and empathise with her and all that, and encourage her and assure her that she's fine and perfect just how she is. I mean, yes, she may have undershot the height of her parents, but I wanted to encourage her that she's fine just how she is, but there just wasn't enough time, as said before. I mean, not only would I probably have encouraged that to her, I think I could name a good few examples who would have just been perfect for her. you know, and would have really, taken her under her wing and wrapped her arm round her shoulder. Friends like, I'll give 3 examples. Friends like, friends like Lisa Perch, Harriet Banker, and Dawn Marie Smith. They would have been just perfect examples, to try and help her a little bit, help her, encourage her with embracing who she is and encouraging her to give her some self-assurance that she's completely fine just who she is and just how she was built and made. They would have been the most wonderful examples for her to help her and all that, and and bond with her about this sort of thing. No, really, they would. I don't know about me, but like I said, there wasn't enough time for me to try and help her in whatever way I could. But obviously I would have refrained myself for some things, which were not bad things, but just refrained myself from trying to help her too much and all that. I wouldn't never mean to help anybody too much, exceeding a certain limit of help, but I only said what I thought was right. But we were okay. We were completely okay. I think the disappointment was, I think we had the potential for a newfound friendship, but we didn't. Never mind. It's possible we could run into each other again in the future someday, but we shall see. But that's what this story was all about. It was based on an encountering I had with a lady. Young lady, very likely. I think she's almost certainly younger than that of my age, because she definitely looked a lot younger than I did. But lovely looking lady, lovely young lady, but obviously disappointed. It was an impactful, moving encountering for me. I've met many wonderful new people in my lifetime who I'd never met before, and only once in my life, in various interesting random places. And sometimes I've just been conversant, like just a boom. So this one was moving, and I've had other moving encounters with other people too. But really, before I end this video, what the story really is about is about encouraging people to embrace their difference and be proud of who they are, because after all, at the end of the day, you are perfect. You're just perfect, just how you are. That much more could certainly be said. But sorry if I was waffling too much. But thanks everybody indeed for watching this very video indeed. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I shall certainly see you in the very next Inspirational Chats episode. Ta-ta, another time. Goodbye. And may your good wishes be bringing you great expectations of happiness.